Sydney Aquarium. John Burgess was running the show then, and two weeks after I got there, John left. That was probably the best 2 weeks of life. John was awesome. He used to throw us big barbecues every Friday night.
He's pretty well financed too, I think. John.
Yeah.
It wasn't struggling.
And then,
It was a skywalk, wasn't it?
Skywalk.
Yeah.
And then it all went belly up. And after James had finished his 5-year tender, Kevin came in and he was slash and burn. And that's when it all. How long did you last after?
I think I would have, in total, probably around 15 years, but it certainly changed with that CEO.
Yeah, but how long after I left were you there?
Yeah. Well, actually, I remember when all that went down, and probably only a few years after that.
Yeah, because everyone.
I think there was a massive exodus, to be honest, after that.
Purged everyone.
It did change things.
Yeah, that was a fun time.
Yeah.
But I met Hamish and we just sort of hit it off, and Hamish had a love for reptiles and he's also a bit of a shark whisperer. Sort of. Hamish was a legend at the aquarium because he'd get in with the sharks in the big shark oceanarium and grab a shark and flip it upside down and do all sorts of things.
As one does.
And so it was great while we were down there. It was an awesome place to work, wasn't it?
Good years, yeah. A lot of fun memories.
And then did you join the police force?
I did 3 years there. I did a complete career change. My friend at the time was in the wateries, and from Sydney Aquarium I thought we'd mix things up a bit, and I had an interest in animal training too, and I thought potentially the dog squad. And the 3 years of GDs broke me really, and I thought, no, it's not for me. And then an opportunity then came up at Townsville at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, Reef HQ. I set up a reptile relocation business up there, which I did for 14 years, and I also worked at Reef HQ, Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority and AIMS, and then I ended up working in JCU in the life sciences and installed a number of reptile terrariums and cages, saltwater crocodile, green python, bits and pieces.
Davey von Cullenberg, who was there as well before you, wasn't he?
Dave Cullenberg, yes. He came to Sydney after I was there, and he was there for a bit, and then he went to Cairns, I believe.
Okay. So Dave was another aquarist.
But he did go to Reef HQ for a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's probably like reptiles too. The aquarium industry is quite small, and you tend to cross paths with the same people. And the funny thing was, when I went up to Reef HQ, Glenn Everson, who was a guy that I worked with at Sydney Aquarium, he had just departed a role that I took over there. And then he went to AIMS, and after I left Reef HQ, I went to AIMS, and he departed there. So, I don't know, it was just circumstances, but I seemed to just keep filling the roles that he was leaving. So it's a small industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Hamish is going to talk about a few of his experiences he's had with snake bites and his passion for venomous reptiles. So I'll move it over to you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. So Cole's done a very good job there, obviously, of introducing me, and it's lovely to be back rubbing shoulders with reptile people, because, to be honest, I sort of became a bit introverted of late. I went up to Townsville for 14 years, worked at a number of places up there, started some snake relocations, which is fantastic because a lot of the species that you cross paths with up there are fantastic. On a regular basis, you'll get some nice big coastal taipans, a lot of browns, lesser black whips, a lot of really cool alapas, and some of the more obscure ones, the smaller ones that you come across as well that you don't often get to see down here. So that was a good experience. So over the years, was lucky enough to work in some nice places up there and mix with some animal people. There's often trials and tribulations in life, and my beautiful wife, my soulmate, my best friend in the world, she passed away up in Townsville. And to be honest with you, I've been trying to put the pieces back together ever since, and I'm still in the process of doing that. So I'm hoping in time some answers will come to me, but she was my staunch supporter, and we go out herping on the roads together. She's my best mate, and recovering from that is something that seems impossible at the moment. But I've come back down to the Central Coast to the house that we bought together And I've been really lucky, Rob and Chris, that I've started to do some work for their Sydney snake catchers, which I'm really grateful for, because it's getting me back, my hand back on the tools, so to speak, doing what I love doing. Oh, what's that, sorry?
How'd you get that job?
Yeah, I know, there's some bloke I used to know, he's working in the aquarium, I think mentioned me, but I'll get back to that. But I've enjoyed doing that because it's getting back out in the coal face. It's, you know, if I'm not getting paid to go and relocate snakes, I'm looking for them anyway. So to be able to do that is terrific. And it's funny actually in the context of coming back as a catcher that I lived on the coast for years, and I've seen the most beautiful places that I'd never usually visit, because when you get a snake job, you typically go to nice places where the snakes are. They're usually close to the bush, or they're in areas that you probably haven't seen before. So I've got a different, renewed sort of appreciation of the coast, and had always done a lot of herping down here, but I guess, you know, familiarity can sometimes make you take things for granted, and I kind of vowed not to do that again, because coming back, it's just a beautiful part of the world. I love to get into the bush, I love to go fishing, I love to go looking for snakes, and there's a big sense of gratitude that I get to do that again. And actually, I've got a number of photos here. That's actually from a recent job for Sydney Snake Catchers, actually, that beautiful red belly up on the Central Coast. So I'll share them as I go. It's a bit of a mishmash, and I've put some points down that I'm going to talk about. And originally when Cole said if I'd be wanting to do the talk, it was over the years I've had a couple of quite severe envenomations, and it's more, the demographic of the audience was something I wasn't sure of, and there's some very accomplished people here that I'm not here to sort of to say anything that you guys don't know or exceed my knowledge in, so I'm by no means trying to do that. But I think by putting some experiences on the table and lived experience, and whether those experiences shared, it's not a bad thing, because I know for me, some of the consequences of the bites and the way that they presented themselves were quite atypical compared to what I typically expected, and some of the long-term ramifications were certainly more severe than I'd anticipated. And so, you know, obviously there's some very accomplished elapid keepers here. Had there been more people that potentially were thinking one day of keeping elapids or interacting with them, a lot of the information would probably be more applicable to them. So feel free, guys, to step in and say anything you wish at any time, and educate me in many things that I'll probably say. So yeah, Cole's done a good job there of introducing me, and I'm just going to randomly put some pictures up I go, just to try and freshen things up. Another little, see if it will come up for me. Here we go. Another little feisty red belly the other day. That was in a warehouse on the Central Coast. So I've got a soft spot for red bellies, as most people that have kept snakes over a long period of time have. They're always one of my all-time favourite, and continue to be to this day. I've actually done some breeding with some North Queensland red bellies, which I like too. I find they're a little bit different to the southern ones. And that was the other interesting thing, actually, of going to different areas and seeing different snakes and different environments. And I'd always sort of, you know, looking for red bellies down on the Central Coast, you go look for areas of reedy, swampy areas and creeks and dams and whatnot, and I was surprised. I tried to replicate that up north, and I didn't have the success. And then I went into the rainforest, and I suddenly started to come across a really large number of red bellies, particularly up in the sort of hinterland behind Paluma in those areas of the cooler climate. But they were very much a denizen of the rainforest up north. And when I look at them physically, I notice the eyebrow ridge is not as prominent, their head's not as compressed, they've got a larger proportional eye. To me, they almost take on colubrid type features compared to the southern red bellies. And I don't know if there's going to be more work. I know people have tried to split snakes and then amalgamate them. At the end of the day, they're probably a geographic race of the same species. But quite interesting looking at them, how physically different they can be, and also the habitat that I find them in. They're typically a rainforest snake where I was, and I didn't really find them in the habitats that I'll typically find southern ones. So there's probably more room to sort of look at that, but I did find that quite interesting. So I've been breeding some lineages from that region, and it'd be nice to establish those sort of on a larger scale. But I do have that fascination for them for sure. So anyway, so my background, kept snakes over 40 odd years. I've always enjoyed keeping a variety of elapids, particularly the seditious group, Leo mulgars and collets and blacks and whatnot, and also some of the texties and other bits and pieces. I've got a soft spot for, I love diamonds and carpets. I know people would say move through the industry and they get different morphs and this and that. I like wild types, and I'm happy for all the others as well. I think there's a place for all of it, but I love seeing a snake that you can breed and look at, that you can potentially see a similar one in the wild. I think that's an attraction to me, but that's a diverse hobby and it's something for everyone. I think that's a healthy thing. That's great. And I'm always really encouraged by the expansion of the hobby and how many people are getting into it these days. And the Central Coast Reptile Expo was a great example of that. There's so many people up there, which was really good to see. I know starting out, you know, you couldn't get a reptile license, and you know, you had to go and grab what you could, and you had to sort of live a life in the shadows. And now you can just apply for a license and keep whatever you want, pretty much. And you know, we used to make our own thermostats and spray globes with automobile paint and do all that sort of stuff. And now you can walk into the shop and get everything you don't need and nothing to do. But either way, you've got access to everything, you know. So it's easy these days for kids that want to get into reptile keeping, whereas in the past you had to really want to do it and do the hard yards and trials and tribulations and learn the hard way. Sometimes lose animals and do things better. But I think, you know, a lot of that paid off in the long run because you learn a lot about what you're doing. My current collection, I've got a small one. I had a bad tiger bite, and I was never going to get out of the hobby, but it rocked me around because my wife was really sick at the time, and I was mindful that I was letting her down, not able to look after her when I was really compromised. And I sold a collection of tigers which were really remarkable, amazing. Chapel Islands, Kangaroo Islands, Mount Gambier's, all types of really gorgeous tigers, and they went down to reptiles down under, down in Childers. I gave him, Dave Murcho, a really good deal on the whole lot, and I wanted them to go somewhere where they'd be appreciated, and he had a big history in keeping tigers, and they're on display down there, so I think it was the best option for it, and I certainly don't discount building those up again, but it wasn't right when I was just fixated on trying to get my wife through the sickness. I still keep red bellies. I will to the day I die, hoping not why I die, but till I die. And I've got a selection of beautiful diamonds and carpets, which I adore, and once again I always will. So yeah, as Cole touched on, I was lucky enough to cross paths with Cole at Ocean World, and back then we had seals in the top level, and the seals went because at the point in time they were owned by Coral World, that also owned Underwater World over in Perth. So they wanted the seals to go across to Perth, and then we ended up with this void of the whole top section, which effectively to me looked like a reptile pit. And the funny thing was that the whole structure started to be compromised because the original design needed the water in the top to create engineering stability throughout the building. So all the water was taken out of the top, and then we had to go through and put scaffolding on scuba under the tank to try and keep this building, because it was an old building. It used to be Manly Marine Land back in the old days. And anyway, so we did a lot of retrofitting to try and keep it safe to the public. And then we had this pit at the top, and the notion was to create a Dangerous Australians display, and that's where Bob Whitty came into the picture, who was kind enough to provide animals and do the presentations. He came along and actually started to help with that. And it was quite successful because obviously people could come in there, they could see the sharks and whatnot, and they could be educated about snakes and see them up close. So it was something that hadn't really been done in aquariums before. It was quite groundbreaking because you tend to focus on sharks and marine creatures, but suddenly we had both, which is really good. So there was a period of time of doing that. I came and went from Sydney Aquarium. We had a lovely big, actually had a croc that was, in my mind, she was a pretty dangerous croc, and obviously Ned's got a plethora of experience in this area, but her name was Agro. She was about 3.1 metres, good sized female, but she kept us on our toes because we used to do things a bit differently to what you do these days. And the way the pond was designed, it was a fairly, it was a tapered out shallow end to a door, and it had a small concrete area. And we all know when animals get fixated on food, they react pretty quickly. So the way the design was pretty bad because you'd basically slide the door open, and of course the croc knew as soon as the door started sliding, food was coming, and she'd be at the door, and you had no way to get into the enclosure. So we ended up having to pull the door back slightly and then tap her on the nose until she was back far enough, and then say, yep, righto, door's open, and take a board out, and then bang, bang, crocodile would jump up on you, until eventually she'd tire herself out a bit. And then you'd reach over with a rabbit and bang, you'd feed her, you know, but I'd come home with all the skin off my knees gone. And it was good fun. But in my mind, she was a dangerous croc because she was mobile, she was big enough to kill you, but she was small enough to be really athletic.
She was a big female.
She was a big female, and she'd nest every year. We'd take eggs off her, she'd lay 30 or 40 eggs every year, not fertile ones, but she was a gorgeous croc, and I actually don't know what became of her because Sydney Wildlife World was then built, and then they got a large croc there, and I don't know where she went, but she was a magnificent specimen, but she was one that kept us on our toes, and she was a pleasure to work with. But I think
I'm watching that.
Well, yeah, actually, I think I've still got an old cassette of that somewhere. So it's probably everyone will take a collective gasp and say, God, how'd you do it like that? But anyway, I did things different. Going up the reptile park and feeding Eric was a bit different. And to be honest, I found Eric a bit more predictable, had more room to move. He was more methodical, he was slower, very powerful animal, but comparative to this crocodile at Sydney Aquarium, he was actually a bit more of a pleasure to deal with. But anyway, yeah, Sydney Wildlife World was open, and we incorporated snakes and reptiles into a large section there. Got some big scrubbies down, got an elapid collection, as well as macropods, mammals. And that was a big venture, actually, getting Sydney Wildlife World off the ground. So had a fair bit to do with that.
You had the same problem with the scrubbies as you did the crocodile.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the scrubbies are good value, weren't they? But you know, I mean, once again, they're such an iconic Australian snake. It's good to put them on display. I think, was it the Barkers described them as heat-seeking missiles with tip and teeth? You know, and I think they're pretty close to the money there. But anyway, yeah, up to the reptile park. I was looking after the elapids for a while up there, feeding Eric the croc and doing bits and pieces there. Then came the sea change up to Townsville. Snake relocator up there. Worked for Reef HQ, AIMS, Australian Institute of Marine Science, JCU. Life in Townsville, yeah, you know, the heat's pretty impressive. The reptiles are fantastic. I've got some really good spots to go out looking for reptiles. Up around Paluma, Harvey Range, those areas, picking up slaty greys and all sorts of carpentier snakes, you know, black stripe snakes, you name it. There's some really good herping fields up there, big scrubbies. Biggest scrubby I found was on the way out to Paluma Dam. And I just to this day wish I found dozens of scrubbies, but this one that took the cake, and I wish I'd put a measure on it. I know we all say it's like fishermen, but I really think that was a snake of a lifetime. And one of my regrets is I didn't actually put a measuring tape on that one. But there's some magnificent animals up there to come across. And if ever you're up that way and you need someone to show you, if I go up with you, I can show you some really good spots. So yeah, over the years, exotic and native species, I've been lucky to work with crocodilians. Sea snakes is another thing too. Talking to Cole before, there used to be a hydrodophilo, and then they've amalgamated them into elapids. And I bred, and I'll put this article here, people want to have a peruse through it afterwards, but it was one of the first breedings of olive sea snakes that I managed to accomplish, a lot by luck. I'm not sort of claiming any skill here, but it was a fascinating process to watch. And we had these two, we had a Hardwicks and had a couple of olive sea snakes, and we eventually had some success. We had some stillbirths, and then we had success with these, and actually the progeny went to Cairns Aquarium, and I believe that's the generation they've still got was from that breeding. Managed to capture a fair bit of data in terms of gestation, courtship, mating, snout vent sizes, weights, etc. of the babies. And I put together a paper on it, and I put it out there in a German international zoological magazine, picked it up and published it, which was pretty nice. So that was something a bit different, and you know, that was the marriage of my love of aquariums and reptiles that worked really well. Did a lot of rehab with sea snakes. Tricky animals to deal with, really, because some of them are such pedantic feeders. You get some that have got tiny heads that are predominantly fish egg eaters, and then you've got, like, you know, your pelagic ones like yellow-bellied sea snake, olive sea snakes, which are one of the best suited to captivity, more of a foraging sea snake that'll adapt to a confined place. There's challenges in looking after them, but I was really stoked to breed them, so that was something that I really enjoyed doing. In the past, in the old Reptile Australia magazines, had a few articles published in there. I crossed paths with Peter Merchant actually up in Townsville after the red belly bite, and he this book here I think is a really good publication if you're interested in venomous snakes, and by Weinstein Ramasan and Peter Merchant, and he ended up putting the case study of this red belly bite in there, which was a good read. But if you get a chance, and I'm sure a lot of you have, I think that's a really good book that explains a lot of the chemistry behind snake bites, a lot of the venom components. It's a very thoroughly researched book, and I think that's a really good one. But the red belly bite did end up in there, even though you said it was my left hand, even though it's my right. So yeah, and then as I say, relocated reptiles in Townsville for 14 years. Snake bites. It's one of those things. I very reluctant. Yeah, please.
You haven't mentioned sea turtles.
Yeah, well, I thought I'll be here for 8 hours in one second. But
I won't leave you alone.
No, I know you're the turtle man. Yeah, over the years too, rehabbed a lot of turtles. Interestingly enough, actually at Reef HQ, we had one come in and we were trying to ID what it was. It ended up being a hybrid for a hawksbill marine. And it was quite interesting actually. And we ended up getting that to a point it could be released, and then it was found washed up with a hook in its mouth, and it actually ended up making it. But that was quite an interesting find, that one.
Because so that's where we sort of got a reconnection with at the aquarium.
Yes.
Because we had that area where all the turtles were being rehabilitated.
That's
on
right.
the side there.
And we worked alongside Taronga Zoo, and I noticed a lot of the vets that used to come across are still going actually, a lot of that series, Francis and whatnot, Kimberley. But yeah, rehab was a big thing. You know, you get these sea turtles, they're probably 40, 50, 60 years, these great big turtles coming in. Who knows what stories they could tell you. Scars all over them, shark bites, missing flippers. What a privilege to cross paths with these animals and get them back on track and get them back out. But a big thing of these guys was the floating syndrome they'd get, where they'd basically get air trapped and they'd float and they couldn't get to the bottom, and they were very prone to boat strikes and tiger shark bites and whatnot. But yeah, over the years, yeah, a lot of turtle work as well, marine turtles. And I know Cole's very accomplished with freshwater turtles as well. And we did at Sydney Aquarium have, I think, longicauls and a few of them.
Yeah, well,
We didn't have a big collection, but we had some freshwater turtles. Yeah. Yeah, so look, when Cole contacted me, he said, would you be happy to sort of talk on a couple of the bites? Because I had a couple of clinically significant bites, and I don't particularly like talking about bites because I think, firstly, I don't want to give the impression that there's any pride or any sort of bravado. There's not at all. In fact, it's a source of embarrassment that this happened because I pride myself on interacting with snakes, and the snake's going to bite you because it's scared. We all know that, or in some situations, a mistaken food response. And for me to promote bites and sort of talk about bites, the last thing I want to do is put a perception out there that a snake wants to bite, has a willingness to bite, is preoccupied with trying to bite, because as we all know, it's completely false. It couldn't be more opposite. So I'm reluctant to bring it up because of the bad publicity that it creates. But I was sort of thinking, in the context of people that love and keep and respect snakes, it's a different ballgame. And I think, had there been potentially people that wanted to come in and keep a lapwing, and they're not such an accomplished crowd, they'd probably sort of get that information from me in terms of what they could potentially expect from bites. Only because I can provide some lived experience with a couple of examples, and it didn't always match how I had historically sort of researched and thought would happen. And I'm sure other people who've experienced bites could probably say in their own circumstances that was the case. And you know, over the years, smaller lapwings, marsh snakes and whip snakes and whatnot, and the old brown tree snake, I did have a few red belly bites, a lot of carelessness. I had some tiger bites, and I actually got a rough scale bite up at Kempsey some years back. Ended up in Kempsey Hospital up there. Just stupidity on my behalf, on a road at night, thinking there was a intergrade carpet, and I didn't have a torch, and the corpse grabbed it and bang up on the hand, and just 101 stupidity really. And that's why I say the bites are nothing to be proud of. And in fact, the serious bites that I got were from snakes that I adore, and you know, for me to have made such blatant mistakes, to put myself in that position to get bitten, and then effectively the disrespect I showed those animals to get bitten is something that I have no pride in whatsoever. So I certainly don't want to stand on a soapbox and talk about bites of any sense of affection at all, not at all. But I do think
you're not giving yourself enough credit, because a lot of people do get bitten. They keep venomous stuff.
Yeah.
That many of them, they get one bite, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. And the way I did see it is that, you know, my love for animals, and particularly venomous snakes, is far greater than my fear of getting bitten again. And I certainly would like to do things differently in terms of negating the risks I probably took in the past, but it certainly wouldn't deter me from keeping them, because I think for people that love reptiles, and I know a lot of you here are that way minded, it's entrenches in your psyche of who you are. And a life without reptiles is not a life I want to live. So it certainly won't stop me, but it's an opportunity to tell my experiences, I guess, and allow people to make informed decisions should they want to interact or keep a lapwing at some point. So yeah, obviously I wanted to clear the air there. This is not a mission of me standing up to have any sort of pride in the bites at all. In fact, a sense of embarrassment and shame that I didn't get bitten. So,
well, the reason why I wanted you to do a talk about it, because you told me about when Katniss came and done the interview with you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I watched that, and you were so articulate.
Oh, thank you, Cole.
Articulate in the way you explained what happened. And
Yeah.
discussing
Yeah,
how it all happened and what happened afterwards.
yeah,
I thought that was a really interesting interview.
yeah.
that you did.
It's a different insight, I guess. And
And I knew that
Yeah.
people would just be interested.
absolutely, and there is, let's face it, it is interesting. I mean, the complex cocktail of a snake venom, you know, a modified salivary gland that has all these different components, hemotoxins, myotoxins, neurotoxins, coagulants, anticoagulants. What a chemist is snake venom. It's incredible what it does, what its components are, how we treat it, how our bodies respond to it. It is a fascinating subject. And yeah, so hopefully I can just highlight a couple of these bites anyway, and feel free to tap in with other lived experience on the way. A quick sort of diversion too is, I was going to look at the rationale of keeping venomous snakes, because a lot of people ask me, well, why do you keep them? And I think if you look at the majority of Australian snakes are venomous. Not all of them are deadly by any means, but the vast majority of snakes are venomous to some degree. So if you want to keep snakes, there's a fair chance you're going to want to keep species that do have venom. My mindset would be, if a red belly was non-venomous, they'd probably be as popular, if not more, than a lot of python species. They're an iconic, gorgeous snake, and it probably is something that deters people sometimes, not through lack of wanting to. But I think if you want to keep a cross-section of Australian reptiles, it would be remiss not to mention venomous snakes as potential candidates. And there's so much more to these snakes. People just focus on the venom. Their life cycle, their physiology, their appearance. There's so much more to these animals than purely their venom capacity. That's a very significant part of them. But a lot of people want to keep them regardless of that. So, and there's also the challenging husbandry, housing, keeping them safe. I would take the view that if you do keep venomous snakes, there is an onus on you to promote them positively, I believe, and to educate people. And I think if we're lucky enough to be able to legally keep these animals, the way that we can give back is to educate people and promote their conservation. So I've always been mindful of that as well. The psychology of people that want to keep them, there are the element of people that want to keep them for the attention side of it, which I think is dangerous and can also falsely represent these animals to the wider public. And I think that the pivotal part is to prioritise animal welfare. How you keep them is essential. And of course there's the legalities of venomous snakes. It's different in every state. I had an R5 down for 30 odd years in New South Wales, went up to Queensland, got a advanced venomous licence there, and then coming back out to New South Wales, pretty much had to start the process again, despite the fact I still had a collection. So the states don't talk, and that's frustrating at times. The bureaucracy gets in the way of things. But the rationale behind the venomous licence, that you've got to keep basic licence first and then a class 1 and class 2 for a certain amount of time. Your references, your first aid, your bite management protocol, etc., I guess is there in the mindset to try and keep everyone safe and the public safe. So, but there's a few hurdles to jump through if you do want to do it, of course. Of course, keeping venomous snakes increases the risk of bite. I think that needs to be talked about too is the impact of bites on long-term health of yourself, the immediate effects, psychological effects, and also that of your family and your loved ones. I've got 2 girls and I had a beautiful wife, and serious bites drag them through a lot of stress as well. Watching someone they care about really suffer. The tiger bite, my eyes were not functioning. The kids would come in and cry when they saw me. My wife didn't know if I'd pull through. And it's not just about you, it's about your loved ones, and it's about what you put them through when you put yourself in a potentially deadly situation. So it's not something to take lightly. Keeping these animals, the consequences to yourself and to those around you is something that you really need to consider. The more you keep, the longer you keep them for, through sheer statistics, the more chance you are of potentially getting bitten one day. So it's a sobering thought. And the other thing is too, is, when you look at bites and the nature of bites, obviously you get defensive bites, which can have a high percentage of low venom yields or even dry bites, but in captivity there's probably a higher chance of getting a feed-related bite through the sheer nature of how we interact with them. Feed bites are a different ball game with high envenomation levels, high venom yields, and typically more serious bites. So potentially keeping snakes in captivity, you're opening yourself up for potentially more dangerous bites. So that is something to think about. And once again, the crowd I've got here is, you know, snake bite management. We all know venomous snakes. Venom travels primarily through our lymphatic system. Australian snakes, relatively short fangs, high potent venom, small yields, but disperses through the lymphatic system. So the old adage of compression and bandage, not a tourniquet. We're trying to restrict the tissue, lymphatic tissue, to stop the dispersal of venom. Theoretically, buying time, it's not a cure. To get to hospital where blood's going to be taken, levels of venomation can be assessed, and then subsequent antivenin given if required. The reason I just touched on that is because I was just going to talk about the bites I had and how that seemed to contradict that, and I'll go into more detail in a sec. And of course, antivenin, fascinating stuff. Down in the serum laboratories, big draft horses inject tiny amounts of venom, build up antibodies, eventually extract the antibodies, and effectively that's what gives you antivenin. So horse serum is a big part of the antivenin production, and with that comes the risk of anaphylaxis and even a lot of detrimental effects. And I was talking to Bob before, and I actually developed serum sickness as well. And I think it's something too that subsequent bites, if you've had an effect like that and you've had serum sickness and you've built an allergy, can be more serious as time goes on. So these are other things to think about. So on that note, I'll go into the first case study here. Let's try and get this sequence right. I don't know if I will or not. But
Feel free to sit if you want.
oh, yeah, okay. I'll keep dancing around. Nervous energy. So there you go. The first bite I was going to talk about. So this was a captive red-bellied black snake. 6-year-old. He was a big animal, 1.65 metres long, 1.8 kilos in weight. Beautifully placid snake, as these species often become in captivity. And unfortunately, in this particular situation, a feeder response bite occurred through my mismanagement. Changing water quickly rather than getting the animal out, putting it in a tub. Animals obviously associated with the door opening and food, whack onto the finger. This particular animal was a very much a feeder response bite. Chewed the bite. I couldn't remove the animal quickly. Put both barrels through that finger. My immediate response after the bite was to obviously put the animal back in the locked enclosure. I went and tried to bleed it for a bit. Obviously not needing to leave residual venom for identification purposes. And what I was surprised about, and this is where this individual lived experience can come into it to compare bites, I was surprised at the profuse bleeding from the red belly. And a lot of literature doesn't say that. You know, you might get a couple of specks and particularly different species, such as brown snakes, but the red belly bled and bled and bled and bled. I had a trail of blood to the bathroom from this particular bite, and I was surprised at how much that particular bite did bleed. So I applied the bandage straight away after putting it under the tap, and I was surprised how immediate the symptoms started to come in, despite having the pressure and mobilisation bandage put in place. So I had immediate burning sensation of the bite site, dizziness, faint, and I began vomiting profusely. I had diarrhea, as graphic as that is, straight off the bat. And the paramedics in that particular case arrived within about 15 minutes. And the thing about the red belly bite, and I've seen it so often on documented bites, saying, oh look, you know, the effects were negligible and it didn't hurt too much. And I can tell you, in an envenomating bite, and I know other people have had envenomating bites, it was one of the most painful bites. The pain in that bite was unbelievable. And I don't know if that's largely due to the myotoxic effects of that venom, but I could not get enough pain relief, either through opioid pain relief or through IV. But the pain threshold for that bite was second to none. It was unbelievable, and it was prolonged for days. When I first went to hospital, that was when the bandage was first taken off, and you can see at that point there that the finger was already quite black, and as time progressed, the finger effectively just started to deteriorate. But that blackened finger was straight off the bat. Initial bloods didn't actually suggest any envenomation, and that was because the bandage was still in place and it was still effectively containing the venom without it spreading to the lymphatic system. But as soon as the bandage came off, the levels, the CK levels primarily, which is the basic muscle dying off, went through the roof, and tiger snake antivenin was administered pretty quick after that. So the fingertip was black straight away, as I said, and the antivenin was given, and basically from that point forward, the finger deteriorated quite consistently. Rhombolysis, so my urine was dark red, lining of the kidneys were breaking down. That bite was 5 days in hospital, and then I was discharged, and 14 days post-bite, my smell and my taste, which is a typical symptom of red belly bites, disappeared. I couldn't taste anything, I couldn't smell anything. I was leaking protein from my kidneys, and the finger was continuing to go downhill. So there's a few shots there, and basically, as the finger was being managed, it was being debrided regularly to try and I'll get this next photo up, trying to actually cut away the dead tissue in an effort to preserve as much of the finger as we could. But it ended up being quite futile because the myotoxic action of that venom was just, it just marched through the finger, and basically it made it impossible to save. And in the end, there's another one there. There's some photos in the hard copy there, basically where the finger was sutured. It was ended up being amputated about 8 weeks post bite, and it was obviously sutured up, and that finger's gone, of course. So anyway, there's a few photos there if you want to have a look through that. But the main takeaway from that bite that I was really surprised at was that there was effects there that, once again, people probably wouldn't allocate, particularly to a red belly black. And it's a dangerous misconception to think that you can get a bite and have no consequence. And I know that there are species that are often seen as the first species you get, because yes, they are very calm, they're very placid, they adapt quickly to captivity, they're an amazing snake, I love them to bits. But with that can breed some complacency, particularly with keepers that are new to elapids and learning their craft. And you know, there's a lot of people say, yeah, such and such was bitten by red belly, and they went to hospital, discharged them an hour later, nothing happened. Oh, no, had worse hangovers and that. Well, my argument to that would be that a lot of these bites that are occurring in the wild are animals that are defensive, and they're a very good-natured animal, and the venom yield is probably very small, if any, and they're not really giving the credit to what a red belly can do, because they're not experiencing the full venom yield of a large specimen that has a really good chew. And losing smell and taste, losing a finger, having ongoing kidney problems, you know, it's not a venom to take lightly. It is a medically significant venom, and it's one that you've got to be careful of. And I think there's probably a lot of misinformation there, and I think by talking about some of these bites and the long-term effects, hopefully we can dispel some of those myths. I mean, you know, like the LD50, which I've got here, is 2.52 milligrams per kilo. So the LD50, a way you rank venomous snakes, a lethal dose 50, the amount of venom, minimum amount of venom it takes to kill half the percentage of the sample of rodents, and ranked accordingly. And the red belly is 2.52 milligrams per kilo, so that's a significant venom capacity there. That's not something to be taken lightly. Comparative to a cobra, you know, 22% is toxic, so less than a quarter. But it's still a venom that requires respect. And I think sometimes it's probably not given that respect because of the high incidence of bites that don't fully envenomate. Yeah, one of the components of the red belly bite, high myotoxins, which are the muscle and the tissue destroying elements. I was reading a paper the other day of a documented case of epilepsy that developed in someone from a red belly bite. Eye drooping, cheek drooping that didn't rectify itself. Smell and taste, my smell and taste is still altered today. I lost it for 3 months. I couldn't smell, I couldn't taste anything. And we take for granted our smell and our taste. Food is a pleasure in life, you know, and I couldn't smell or taste anything. And that was really debilitating and really reduced my quality of life. And about 3 months later it did return, but it's never been the same since. In fact, I've had to relearn a lot of things, because if I walk past someone smoking, it smells like celery to me. Or if I go somewhere else, it'd be like aviation fuel. And all these things now smell different, and the taste is not what it used to be. A lot of the food I can enjoy, and I'm really grateful for that, but it doesn't have the depth of flavour that it used to. So that's lifelong implications there and then. Your smell and taste, and some people don't even get it back. Ongoing kidney problems, muscle weakness. So yeah, it's just food for thought. And the other thing about this bite, it progressed faster than I thought. And I was talking to Bob about this before. And I think, you know, bitten on the extremities, where when you're looking after captive snakes, it's often where you will get bitten, are quite vascular. So whilst their venom is primarily dispersed in the lymphatic system, fingers are very vascular. And a lot of the times when you're bitten on the extremities and on your fingers, the dispersal of venom is a lot faster through blood vessels. And I think that was the case here. And I know Bob was talking about a similar bite, where the effects were almost instantaneous despite the pressure mobilisation bandage being applied quickly. Something to remember as well. You don't always, I used to do talks and say, look, yeah, put this on, make your way to hospital calmly, you should have hours before you have to worry about it. And this kind of showed me that's not always the case, and in fact the tiger bite was likewise, and it was another bite on the finger. So I think bites on the finger, you've got to be aware that they can progress very quickly because they're more vascular than we give them credit for. So that was the case with the red belly, and I'm going to divert now to another species because I unfortunately also did have a tiger bite, which presented differently, but there were some similarities. It's one of my old Chapel Island tigers, and I've got some shots of old tigers I had, and I know you guys have kept dozens and dozens of these animals, and others may not have, but I figured I might as well put a few shots up while I'm talking about them because I do love them. You know, the old tiger snakes, it's interesting because, you know, you talk about classifications and whatnot, and there was a stage, that's a Mount Gambier there was a stage that they were all split up into different subspecies, you know, Humphreysini and Niger and Scutatus, of course, and then they studied them genetically and they found out they're pretty much the same species, and they re-amalgamated them back to Scutatus. But there's the lumpers and the lumpers. At the end of the day, they're one diverse species, and I love the island tigers. That one down is now down at Childers down there. You see my lovely cat being safe against my leg there. This one here is a KI tiger that gave me a nibble and was getting a fair bit of size. They were from Nathan Dunson down at Serum Laboratories down in South Australia. He was pretty good actually, passed a few snakes onto me, which I really appreciated. And I had a couple of goes of breeding the KIs. They're a gorgeous tiger to breed and to look after. I was really fond of them. And I was just talking before about just in terms of keeping lapids and appropriate caging, in terms of keeping them lockable and safe. And I just put a couple of quick shots in here. So these are some of my setups I've got here. And you know, like I say, it's the bread and butter for people here. But lockable cages, no gaps, of course, and making sure that the animals' needs are met is such a pivotal part of looking after lapids, and it's a really, you can do it many different ways, but it's something you've got to always think about, giving the best possible quality of life that you can. But anyway, I was just going to have a chat about this tiger bite. So once again, my mistake, and I put my hand up wholeheartedly, silly mistake once again. This is a peninsula tiger snake, or Kangaroo Island, about 1.2 metres long, 4 years old. Cutting corners again, defensive bite this time, but interestingly enough, the snake bit, and the contact time was minimal, less than a second. I thought it just kissed me actually. I didn't think it actually put any fang in whatsoever. And I looked down and I'd had a blood mark from one fang that had penetrated. And my initial thought was, oh, this is a high chance of a dry bite. It really didn't have much time to put any venom in. Bandaged the bite and then collapsed. And I know Bob was talking about a similar tiger bite with him. And it was on the finger again, which is quite vascular. And the emergency paramedic came and I deteriorated so fast. And like in hindsight looking back, I can't believe how fast that bite took effect despite having the immediate first aid applied. Paramedics arrived, blood pressure dropped dangerously. bloods in hospital, immediate severe envenomation, tiger snake antivenin given. And when they do give antivenin, they'll often do it in a situation where they have adrenaline on hand, heart attack kits and whatnot, because of course people have this notion that if you keep venomous snakes, don't worry, you just have some antivenin. Well, antivenin in itself can be really dangerous. In fact, you know, it could be fatal if it's not administered in the right situation with the right supportive drugs and observations. So antivenin was administered, and really it was a road to hell, to be honest with you. Like that tiger bite, I ended up being moved to ICU as I lost consciousness. I had paralysis that was descending. My eyes couldn't open. I couldn't breathe. They were about to intubate. My heart failed through the night, and they rushed in and completely out of rhythm, managed to put it back into rhythm. I remember the doctors at the base of my bed just saying that they couldn't make any sense of the bloods because the parameters were blown out of the water, and it made me obviously feel quite nervous where this was heading. The bloods revealed no coagulating factors, so I had to see very still. Any movement, any internal bleeding wouldn't be able to be stemmed. And this raised a question which I did a little bit more digging actually in recent times, because I thought we've all seen, you know, when you get a human blood and put it in a vial and you milk a tiger and you put a couple of drops in and it goes to jelly. Why is it that when you're envenomated, and most tiger bites have a lack of clotting ability in the blood, it's typical of tiger bites and brown snake bites actually. And I thought, well, that doesn't make sense because you put it in a vial and it goes like jelly. And that's where this VICC, so venom-induced consumption coagulopathy. So if you get a small amount of blood and put the tiger snake venom in it, in a nutshell, the enzymes within the venom activate the clotting factors, and in a confined space with no exchange of blood, that solidifies and becomes like jelly. But in your body, it's not what happens, and in fact, it's not what's dangerous. It's the possibility of hemorrhaging and bleeding out that's more dangerous, because in your bigger volume of blood that's circulating, and then the enzymes within that venom activate the clotting factors, and suddenly in that big circulating volume of blood, it cannot replenish the clotting factors as fast as they're being activated, end up in a depleted level of clotting factors. So the paradoxical effect is that the desire of the venom to clot your blood monopolises the clotting factors and leads to a deficit that your blood can't make up for, and leaves you unable to clot. And not only that, within that volume of blood that can't clot, you also then get the smaller clots where those little bits of clotting factors have been activated. So you've got these little lumps of clots floating through your blood which can cause stroke, and then you've got the vast majority that can't clot, which means you can bleed out should you have a bleed. So that sort of, you know, you often see it where they get the venom and they put it in and they say that's what it's going to do to you, and it's actually not. It does the opposite, and that's what's so dangerous about it. And that's the paradoxical effect of what's VICC, venom-induced consumption coagulopathy. And I had to research that myself, because when I got all the bloods back, and I thought, well, what do you mean I had no clotting factors? And that's a paradoxical effect, which is quite interesting. So heart problems, of course. Ended up in the stroke unit, in the renal unit. I ended up for 3 weeks in hospital before I could thought to be released. I would say they did a scan of my brain, fearing an intracranial hemorrhage, because I couldn't open my eyes for so long afterwards, and that luckily hadn't happened. And then there was talk of trying to add this more antivenin, but there's only a window period, and that's what people have to understand too. Once venom settles into neural junctions and into like optical nerve junctions and nerve endings, and paralyses those endings, you can't undo that. So you have a set amount of time where there's that free venom that can be binded by antivenin, and after the fact you can't retro do that. And the trouble is, like, when you go to hospitals, a lot of snake bites present every year. Most of them are either dry bites, non-venomous snakes, medically insignificant snakes, and the trouble with that is doctors themselves don't get a lot of practice at effectively treating real envenomations where lives are at risk. So you're left a little bit open there. When you get to a hospital, you've got to hope that they're on the ball with what to do as the situation changes. Sometimes too much information is not a good thing, because you know what's going on, and sometimes the doctors are trying to play catch up. And most tiger snake deaths that have occurred 7 to 24 hours after the bite. It's generally not immediate. But if you don't get on top of it early, it can get away from people very, very quickly, which is quite a frightening prospect. Couldn't lift my eyelids up. Paralysis was descending. Pretty close to getting intubated. I managed to avoid that. And funnily enough, when I was discharged, I went back to the doctor with some bloods about 6 months after, and she said, you shouldn't even be out, your liver's still way out. So it takes a long time to recover from these snake bites. My eyesight came back within about 3 to 4 weeks, and I was so grateful for that. And I would not wish on anyone losing eyesight like that, and also not knowing what was the long-term effects. So the reason I say all this is just because I never would have thought from the second that snake bit my finger that that was the road I was in for. And you know, even to this day, I'm really grateful for my health. And even though I've still got issues, long-term issues from a snake bite, I'm able to do what I do. I'm able to see. I can taste food to some degree. Kidneys probably not 100%, but I still am so grateful for the health that I've got now. And it's just a poignant thing to point out what we're playing with. You know, when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. So yeah, some facts on tigers. You know, their LD50 is 0.118 milligrams. So red bellies are 2.52. These guys are 0.188. Obviously, the lower the milligram per kilo, the more potent venom is, inland type, and 0.025. So just to give you some idea of the rankings of those snakes and the subsequent effects of their bites. The thing was, though, that the tiger bite was not immediately as painful as the red belly bite. The red belly bite was excruciatingly painful, but I think that was more to the myotoxic components of the venom, whereas the tiger snake venom is highly neurotoxic, which will obviously cause paralysis and cause issues like that. I didn't experience the localised pain from the tiger bite, but my life was in threat. A red belly is generally not a snake that can deliver a fatal bite. It can give you a lot of nasty consequences. Certainly a tiger can, but the actual localised pain was far more formidable in the red belly bite than it was in the tiger bite. So I think that's a good example of that neurotoxic element versus that myotoxic element. Tiny yield, but dramatic effects. I would hate to think what a chewing bite would have done from that snake to me. I'm thankful that it tapped me and that was it. But I was just thinking, if that had done what the red belly did, particularly, like big old Chapel Island, out of all the tigers, it's the least toxic venom, but it's still the yield, huge yield, you know. They say least toxic, it's still incredibly potent venom. But I would just hate to think of what a chewing bite from a really big-headed tiger would do. It could be catastrophic, you know. So, you know, you want to keep these animals, you just got to look at the immediate effects: possible death, mobility, muscle aches, paralysis, heart rhythm problems, kidney function problems, intracranial bleeding, internal bleeding, eyesight loss, which luckily was temporary, but I have read some cases where there can be ongoing problems of eyesight, heart, kidney damage, facial droop, the list goes on. And some of these really highly envenomating bites can be particularly nasty for a long, long time. So that's just an overview of those two bites, a red belly versus a tiger. Two commonly kept elapids, different effects of the bites, but one thing they did share in common was how fast the symptoms appeared, and I do put that down to the vascularity of the fingers, I think. And I'm still learning as I go. I'm still trying to research after the fact to see what happened and what the effects, what the venoms were doing to my body. The other thing, and I was mentioning to Bob as well, which he also experienced, was about 10 days after the antivenom I developed serum sickness. So I developed a really bad rash, an itch that I couldn't resolve, hives all over me, and that was a reaction to the antivenom. And that's something else that can happen as well. And the danger for some elaphid keepers over time, if they have bites or they receive multiple doses of antivenom, they can end up with a heightened sensitivity. And I do know some keepers that the urates and cages they clean, they're starting to set them off, and they're starting to build an allergy to even having their snakes on a hook. They're becoming so desensitised to this venom. So sometimes subsequent bites, and particularly if you receive antivenom after these bites, can actually heighten the danger of anaphylaxis down the track. So, you know, there's not always a get out of jail free card, and you can't always rely on the effects of antivenom down the track if you build a heightened sensitivity. So again, just factors to consider. So, quick summary. I'll put some more tiger pictures up because I can. Tell me if you don't want to see any more, but I've got tons of these things. I actually went down to Tassie a number of years back, and I wanted to go and look for some tigers, some Tassie tigers, because they're one of my favourites. And I went up to the Central Highlands. I went down to Bruny Island for a bit, and found some snakes down at Bruny Island, and then I went up towards Lake Sinclair, and I didn't have any sort of, I didn't have any pre-knowledge where these snakes were, so I was just, you know, as I went around, I was just trying to find them, but I had a pretty good strike rate. I found quite a few animals, and yeah, the old black tigers are just something special, you know. I came across a few copperheads as well, which was really nice, and I got a few photos on the way, just trying to see if I got. A lot of the tigers up in the Central Highlands, they were really nice jet black ones, and down on Bruny you can get a few different colour morphs down there, but a lot of the ones up in those colder climates, they just become really solid jet black and just really attractive snakes, and a real pleasure to actually to interact with. I found the majority of them to be pretty docile. A really good spot to find them was when I used to go down to these freshwater creeks and whatnot, and there'd be these black, I think maybe basalt or rock walls along the edges, and you just be able to come down and find them in the morning, sunning themselves there. It was a really good spot to find them. And, yeah, I recommend if anyone who's into elapids wants to go down to Tassie and have a look around, they're pretty easy to come by, and they're pretty cool to come across. That was a Bruny Island tiger, big solid one, that one. And I always try to get a few nice shots of them, but they're pretty compliant. They don't really move around too much. They let you sit there and take a few shots. Let's see if we get some more here. I actually went down to Cloudy Bay National Park, which was down on the south of Bruny, and took a photo of a couple of Bruny Island tigers down there on the sand, which I obviously, see if that photo comes up. I put them on the sand, you can see. But you know, they're gorgeous snakes. They're, the whole tigers down there are just gorgeous to interact with. So that was a really good trip. So just hired a van, went off the beaten track. Thought I might find a Tassie tiger. I didn't. Well, I did find Tassie tigers, but I didn't find the old fellas. So anyway, I'm not going to keep talking and talking. I just wanted to give an overview of those bites and just share some lived experience. I guess from this, I sort of think, well, no, how do you sort of increase or negate the risks and try and keep things a bit safer with these things? And there's things that I always do, like I see many a video of, you know, people with elapids feeding them, and you know, they've got a rat in the tongs and they're showing the camera and this thing's chasing it around the cage and they think it's great. And snake's lunging at this rat. It's like, you want to make a snake really dangerous, that's how you feed it, you know. I always, from day one with elapids, try to get them, my personal view is feed them in a separate tub. No fanfare. Put the food in, put the snake in separate, comes across it, bang, eats it, give it some time to de-associate you with the food, put the snake back in the cage. And by doing that, particularly with really food-motivated species like red bellies, you can cut a lot of risk out. If you're going to get them to chase a rat around the cage and then wonder why it wants to bite you when you go and change the water, it's a no-brainer, you know. So I think separating food time is a really important aspect of husbandry to keep yourself safe. Regular, calm, calculated conditioning sessions, you know, get them out, sit them on a walk, take them outside for a bit of sun, obviously in a safe manner, but the more you can not be the bogeyman to them and desensitise their fear towards you, the better you're going to get on. And I think, you know, for me, it's a lesson I've taken on board is respect the animal. And complacency is a killer, you know. In many ways, handling hot wild snakes is safer because you go and relocate a brown, you know it's going to carry on. It's defensive, you know. You're going to peel one out from under a bit of tin. It's going to defend itself, and so you're ready for that snake to come back up and carry on. Trouble is, in a captive environment, we often view them as pets, and we attach a human emotions to these animals, and it's a natural thing. You can do it without thinking sometimes, you know. And as a result, you're more likely to take liberties with an animal that you're comfortable with than you would with a wild snake. And that's where, you know, you can have a snake 20 years, never bite you freehand, no problems. You have another one that one day have a bad day. I'm not any moral judgment as to what people do or don't do. I think it's their prerogative, but they need to make an informed decision. And some people will get away with it forever. But when you've had a really serious bite, and I've certainly been guilty of being very complacent with snakes, it does make you rethink a bit, because even if it's a 2% chance, that road to hell is not worth going on, trust me. And I think sometimes by just putting that out there and just sort of sharing your experience with people just might make them think twice about taking some of those risks. And none of this at all is trying to sort of dissuade people from keeping leopards, because they are one of the most rewarding animals to keep. I think they're a fantastic animal to learn about in captivity, and you know, I fully advocate the responsible keeping of leopards. I think it's a fantastic thing to do, but I do think that you just got to be really mindful about it and just really think about the impacts of a bite and what they can have in your life. And like I say, it's about making informed decisions. The bites, the symptoms are much faster than I expected. Red belly bites can be far more serious than people than think. Symptoms like blindness, loss of taste and smell, a lot of people don't realise that can happen. So make an informed decision, and I think practice careful practices. By all means, enjoy keeping them. They're fascinating. I would advocate it most definitely if people want to progress down that road to keep them. I think they've given me years of pleasure, and I wouldn't change the world despite what I've been through, but I certainly have changed the way I do things. But more than anything, it's just coming here today to talk about some lived experience, just to try and sort of let people know what my situation was and what I've gone through and what the long-term effects are, and hopefully they can make some more informed decisions as to what they want to do in the future. And that's pretty much the purpose of this talk. Considering the depth of experience here, I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to the subject, or put forward any personal experiences anyone else has had, or make comment on anything I've said on. You know, like one of the greatest things about the reptile community and the knowledge that we have on our fingertips now through the internet and through research and through lived experience is you always learn. You never reach a point that you know everything at all, and that's a fantastic thing. And I time and time again have had views that I've formed and I think are correct, and I've talked to people and I thought, man, I don't think I'm right at all. And it's fantastic to have those horizons broadened. So if there's any sort of comments, please come forward and tell me, and if you've had experiences that are different.
Yeah, so tigers ain't bite for me.
Yeah.
It's been like more painful than ribbon.
Right, well there you go. Yeah, yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense, like
Yeah.
every single individual person has
Yeah.
it's a different bite.
Yep. Was yours on the finger? Where was your bite site? Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. And that's the trouble, isn't it? You know, like.
You know, in first day they teach you that, like, oh, you hit me, you wrap around sitting there.
Yeah, yeah.
Fingers.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the finger biter. We'll bite around, then you go, oh, little windy.
Yeah, that's right. A little picky, you know.
But I got pain and swelling on a different scale. I got tigers worse.
Yeah, right. Right. See, that's interesting too. And did you get any visual disturbances or eyesight problems, or? Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think that's the good thing of.
No one's.
Yeah, right.
None. It's the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing about.
Oh, man.
That's the interesting thing about people sharing experiences, because you know, you read a textbook on a snake bite, it doesn't always follow the script, you know. And I was surprised with the eyesight factor. That took me by surprise.
No nausea, no vomiting, erectile dysfunction. Nothing like that. I might be sterile.
Yeah, right.
That could be from.
Blame the tiger. Yeah, yeah. Did you receive antivenin from that bite?
No, I went to the hospital car.
Yeah, right. So I'm wondering,
Alright.
I'm wondering what yield it was too. You know, whether you spared some of that. I don't know. Yeah.
Other people that I've talked to that have been bitten by tigers, it's all different.
Yeah.
They're all different.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the weirdest tiger one. Like other mates have been hit by it. It's been very serious every time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking around me at people.
Yeah.
There is people that have been unconscious
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah.
The surprising thing is that it was only a very small bite.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. That's what I was surprised at with this one. Was Because I'd had drive bites from tigers that had put both fangs in, I thought for sure, and they ended up with nothing.
I heard a story down at Bathurst, the in the car, stepped on one and got in that foot.
Yeah, yeah,
And it just hung on to it.
yeah.
And it just made a hole in his foot after, like, what you experienced with your, traveling.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, right.
I don't think he was on.
Little whip snake killed someone. And I think all these smaller elapids that we typically don't pay attention to, you don't know until an individual's bitten to know how they'll react. And a lot of it is an allergy to elements of the venom, but it's them as an individual having an adverse reaction to the protein in that venom, which will cause anaphylaxis. So snakes that wouldn't be dangerous have caused fatality. So at the end of the day, if you're a person that's never been bitten by a leopard, you don't really know how you're going to be affected should you be bitten by one of these supposed
One of Kenny's mates,
non-dangerous ones, yeah.
Kenny Kirkland was around John's place one time. He had a little baby bluebelly.
Oh, right.
Just and
Yeah.
it bit him, and he thought to himself, oh, venomous season. He was out 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
Collapsed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can't pick it, you know, you can't pick it. So I guess urge on caution. If you don't know how you're going to react, be somewhere where you can seek some medical attention and don't be too complacent about it, you know.
I hope they know what to do.
Yeah, hope they know what to do. Yeah, exactly right. The funny thing is, when I presented with that KI tiger bite, they said, oh, I said, it's a tiger bite. They said, oh, how do you know? I said, oh, it's a captive animal. No, we don't get tigers up here. I said, no, it wasn't a wild one. You know, it was a captive one. Oh, but need to get a swab to make sure. I said, I can tell you this. And I was having this drawn-out conversation as time was ticking by, saying, I guarantee you, it's from the venom suppliers in South Australia. It was given to me by Peter Nash, Nathan Dudley. It's a locale snake that was taken for venom extraction. It is a tiger snake. And I've got to do a swab.
No, I don't know.
So,
Did they get the swab right?
and they came back and said, oh, it's a tiger snake.
Well, that's some
They
consolation.
just want to practice.
Probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's a bit frustrating, but you know, if you've got someone that's critically ill and then you've got the medical fraternity that aren't well versed in treating them, that could be a dangerous scenario. Yeah.
Well, I think that was an awesome talk.
Oh no, I hope so. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I appreciate everyone listening, and I know a lot of the stuff there was fairly basic, but it was just a couple of recollections. But yeah.
Before everyone goes away, can you all come up and we'll get a photo taken up with the corner?
I think this is good.
Yeah, so you're, yeah.